Alex, you're on mute.
You would think after all this time on Zoom, I would remember that sometimes I can go on mute and then change. Anyway, apologies, everybody. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, What the Caregiving Workforce Really Wants. My name is Alex Banco. I'm the Director of Communications here at the Center for Innovation, which is the nonprofit home of the Greenhouse Project and Pioneer Network. We have two amazing guests today, and we have a really great conversation queued up. But before I introduce my guests and before we get into this wonderful conversation, I just want to lay down a couple ground rules for today's presentation. First of all, you will be getting a full recording of this presentation afterwards at the email address that you used to sign up. And as well, you'll be getting a copy of the slides. So both of those things will be in your inbox probably by the end of this week, if not early next. We encourage you, it'll be a YouTube video, a link. We encourage you to share this far and wide because we know this is a topic that really, really matters to people. Secondly, we want this to be as interactive as possible. I think a lot of us have Zoom webinar fatigue where, we're tired of just hearing people talk at us. We want this to be a back and forth conversation. So after our presenters give their small presentation, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. I've got some questions here, but I'd really like to ask all of your questions instead. So please use the Q&A box. It's got that little question mark down there. That's where I will be monitoring. Don't put it in the chat because we have all your names there, so your questions might get lost. So please make sure that it goes into the Q&A box there with the little question mark. So now I'm going to introduce my two distinguished panelists today. First off, we have Marvell Adams Jr. He's the CEO of the Caregiver Action Network. He's also a member of our CFI board and has so much experience in this space, so much knowledge and wisdom about both the professional and informal caregiving workforce. We also have Jody Kane Pike. She's the content development manager and a family caregiver herself. She has experience in that domain as well, also with the Caregiver Action Network. Before I turn it over to them, I just want to say that this is such an important topic, judging by how many people have signed up, how many people were in here early. We talk a lot about workforce, and the one thing that really, really frustrates me, and I'm sure a lot of you get frustrated too, is when you hear people talk about what caregivers want without actually talking about their perspective, without actually giving their stories, without actually giving, their needs and their wants. There are so many people out there who love being caregivers. There are so many people out there who could be good caregivers, but don't know where they get the resources, don't know where to turn. And then there are so many great caregivers who leave the industry and who leave the caregiving sector because they're not feeling supported. So I really wanted it to be today all about the caregivers, all about the direct experience like Jody has, the direct experience that Marvell has working in the sector and working to empower caregivers. And so that's the lens I want to look at today's presentation from. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Marvell and let's get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. So as Alex mentioned, my name is Marvell Adams Jr. I serve as the CEO of Caregiver Action Network. I also serve as treasurer of the board of CFI. I've been a couple decades long career in aging services and supporting older adults and those that provide support and care for them. And I've been with Caregiver Action Network since July of last year. My colleague, Jody, has joined us as well. Jody, didn't know if you wanted to say an introductory remark about your role at Caregiver Action Network and perhaps how long you've been with us?
Hi, I'm Jody Kane Pike. I've been at CAN for a little over 3 years now, and I handle all of our content development. So I basically write all day long, but I write press releases and I get to work on all the resources that we put up on our website on different disease conditions and for different types of caregivers. So it's very rewarding and I'm learning tons, which is always a good thing. I'm very happy to be here today.
Cool. Thanks so much, Jody. So wanted to talk a little bit about Caregiver Action Network as well as our perspectives, Jody and I's perspectives on not only serving in the organization, but both of us have, caregiving perspectives. And so I'll start with that I have I was not a caregiver until I joined the Caregiver Action Network. And the reason I say that is I wasn't aware. I was a caregiving youth in middle school, but did not realize that's what I should have called myself until I joined this organization. At that time, my mom had a stroke and had a partial impact on her left side and had to go to physical therapy, but also just in general, my two older brothers had already moved out of the house. My dad worked full time, as did my mom, and soon, not too long after her stroke, went back to work. But I supported her and did a great deal of things around the house, and also during that time period, needed to become pretty independent because of that change in our housing or our house dynamics. But my work with Caregiver Action Network is really, really rewarding. And I was going to share a couple of slides just to give you a sense of the type of work that we do. And then give Jody an opportunity to talk a bit as well about her role and her work as a family caregiver. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see if we can pull this off. All righty. Hopefully you can see that. So we start with this slide because this is really kind of the the backbone of a lot of the work we do within Caregiver Action Network. Our goal and our mission is really to support and provide resources, education, training, to the millions and millions of caregivers across the country. And this grid gives you a sample of one of our most frequented areas of our website, which is just filled with resources and information. And I highly encourage any of you, whether you're currently a caregiver yourself, have been a caregiver in the past, or perhaps will be one in the future, to take a look at. But if you can imagine that, when someone is a caregiver, they don't spend 6 months in a course that they took online or in person at a university and then decide, okay, January 1 I'm going to be a caregiver. No, it is something that happens most likely unexpectedly. There's usually a very short runway and an even shorter time period in which to kind of come up to speed on, okay, so what does this mean I need to do now? And part of that responsibility at Caregiver Action Network is to try our best to meet caregivers where they are. And to that extent, we try to provide our tools in a way that are pretty straightforward, meaning, are you a new caregiver? Are you a long-time caregiver? Are you a long-distance caregiver? Are you really trying to figure out how yourself to stay strong, to stay really supported as you are a caregiver? Are the finances, one of the more difficult parts that you're trying to figure out? Or are you just looking for local resources in your area to, whether it's to be part of a support group or just have someone to connect with? But, no matter what that may be, it's important to note that caregiving caregivers number in the millions, and there are millions of different unique situations and scenarios that each caregiver faces. Challenges can be unique. Barriers to figuring out how to get from one part of the day to another can certainly be challenge be considerable. But also recognizing that, as a family caregiver, and that term, even in of itself, has some leeway, because it really is about family, and that can be chosen family. So not necessarily by blood, but friends and families and individuals anywhere in between. So our work at Caregiver Action Network really is to provide those types of resources. Just to give you an example, one of the projects we're working on right now that's funded through a grant is updating our blueprint on mental health. And so this is a guide for individuals that are supporting folks that may have mental health issues or conditions. And so we've worked to update that guide, but change it to look through the perspective of Black caregivers with children with mental health issues. And part of the reasoning for that is that one, you have a disproportionate amount of individuals in Black community with mental health conditions, but also a marginalization or disparate amount of treatment options that are available. And so, just to give you a sense of our work within the organization, we really focus on how can we meet individuals that perhaps have been overlooked or underserved, knowing that the millions of caregivers out there really sometimes are looking for not only resources but an empathetic ear to listen to some of the challenges they may be experiencing. So one of the other things just want to introduce you to, and everything that you see can be very easily found at our website, caregiveraction.org. But one of the aspects that I think is important to bring about is, when you're starting off as a caregiver and understanding the voice of the caregiver, being able to understand what is it that is important to keep an eye on, what is it that is really critical, and being able to understand that role. And so we utilize this guide for folks to be able to say, here's a start for you, because Google can be in a massive, immense area and a difficulty with trying to navigate. And so whether that's giving advice and understanding that seeking support from other caregivers is really important because you are not alone. Uh, and we actually have a really great Facebook community that Jody is one of the moderators of, and it allows people to come together not only to gain camaraderie as caregivers, but also to really ask questions of one another, to share stories, and really, at the end of the day, understand that you are not alone as a caregiver. No matter how unique your circumstances, you're not alone. And so, when thinking of these tips for caregivers, everything from understanding that caregiving is hard work. And so, taking a respite and breaks often is important. Now, you may say, how on earth is that possible? Being able to take a break when you are a caregiver, when you perhaps have a full time job or part time job, when you maybe have kids that you have a responsibility for, and a whole host of other things that individuals may face in their daily lives. How can you take a break? But understanding that in the absence of that respite time for yourself, you really are doing one of the or breaking kind of one of the number one guides that we give folks is that you really have to take care of yourself in order to help provide support for another person. For those of you who've been on a plane, you know very well at the beginning of that, before the plane takes off, the flight attendant comes and you hear overhead during the flight, if there's a loss of cabin pressure, an oxygen mask will fall down, and make sure to put on your oxygen mask first before helping someone else. And that's what we really mean about taking respite and breaks, because as a caregiver, you most likely are there not only because you feel a desire, an obligation, an interest, whatever that descriptor may be a caregiver, but you cannot do that if you burn yourself completely out, if you become ill, if your mental health starts to suffer, and you're not really able to attend to your own needs. And that's really creating a barrier to you tending to the needs of your loved one. And the other one that I'll mention is there is a whole host of really, if you want to call it housekeeping things, literal housekeeping that I'm sure some caregivers do often, but also housekeeping in the sense of organizing information for medical records, being able to have legal documents up to date, and understanding that, there's a whole infrastructure that may be required in order just to keep information that you may need as a caregiver. And so what we share with folks often is that, take that space and time that you can to either yourself or perhaps ask help from others to be able to organize that information so that at the time that is necessary and needed to share that information with a caregiving team, with doctors, with specialists, you name it, to be able to do that readily. And the last thing I'll mention on the 10 tips is that, being open to technologies and ways that you can help your loved one is also a big part of trying to navigate this field of caregiving and find ways that it be creatively employing resources that can support you and perhaps even extend your ability or expand and amplify your ability to be a caregiver. And so this brings to mind a great deal of novel technologies that may exist out there, whether it's ChatGPT and OpenAI, or just Googling something, or even there are now companion robots that exist out there to take some of the social pressure off of caregivers when it comes to interacting with their loved one. But be that as it may, it's important to recognize for your own self, what is it that your needs are going to be, and then what is it that you can do in order to support your loved one as best you can. So, um, Jody, I have completely forgotten if you were going to talk about any of these slides or not. Do you have a recollection of if I'm going to pause for a minute and let you talk for a bit, or I'm going to roll through these?
I thought you were gonna do it, but I can if you want me to.
No, no, no. I'll keep going. I'll keep going. So this I mentioned earlier. It's our Caregiver Action Network community that is hosted on Facebook. And it's a really active group, and we highly encourage individuals to take a look, join the group. Obviously it's free to join, as long as you have to have a Facebook, you have to have a Facebook account, of course, but it exists really to be that meeting place for caregivers. As some of the quotes here, you can see whether it's Amanda saying that just so many good tips and lots of emotional support, to Donna saying that, asking questions around advice for any new caregiver coming into the community, in places where they can get swift answers. Because many times being able to figure out, okay, I got the diagnosis along. I was sitting beside mom when she got it. And now I've Googled myself, into a coma of finding out all these different details about it. But now what do I do? I would love to connect with someone that has been through this perhaps previously. I would love to understand a perspective of someone that perhaps has understood this roller coaster ride that I'm on, and being able to come to a place of solace in knowing that not only am I not alone, but someone else has been through this. And in fact, millions and millions of people are in roles of caregiving and have been through things that are similar to other caregivers' experiences on a daily basis. And so recognizing that there are communities out there, not just our Facebook group, but there are communities out there that exist, whether it's on social media platforms like TikTok, on Instagram, whether it's your local churches and senior centers, whether it's your local AAA, your area agency on aging. There are really a host of resources out there for caregivers. And, when you're talking about the overarching, what sometimes referred to as the caregiving crisis, many times that's referred to and talked about in talking about paid caregivers, which also there are individuals that are working caregivers out there, which is a whole nother, cadre and topic of understanding that many of you on this Zoom right now are during your day jobs, working in a caregiving role, perhaps within a community. And in your evening and night hours, you are unpaid caregiver as well. And so recognizing that there are many multifaceted aspects of caregiving, excuse me. But that goes to say that there's an aspect of caregiving when it comes to that caregiving crisis that we really have to acknowledge, is that one of the precipitating factors that we see currently is the number of able-bodied individuals that are in the U.S. to be able to provide care to someone is shrinking. And so a few years ago, the statistic that was reported is for every person that needs care support, there were 7 individuals, out there that could perhaps provide that support on a ratio basis, so 7 to 1. And it is now 5 to 1, and soon will be 4 to 1. And this also not only puts stress on the paid caregiving environment, but also family dynamics and the family caregiving environment that goes along with it. And so recognizing that not only does that have impact across caregivers that are right now, but recognizing that, caregivers across generations becomes more and more important. Individuals that are Gen Xers, otherwise known as the sandwich generation, that are caring for perhaps an older adult or someone in their life that needs their support, that's older than them, an older generation, as well as having a responsibility of some sort for a younger generation, whether it's their own kid or someone that whose lives they're in that is younger and they need to guide. But either way, recognizing that intergenerational caregiving is also becoming more and more of a conversation and a reality because of the shrinking ratio of caregivers to care recipients. So, one of the things that we also provide as a resource with Caregiver Action Network is that we have a caregiver help desk. And this is a tool that actually launched right before the pandemic. So it was rather serendipitous for it to launch at that time. But also recognizing that as I talked before, there's this moment or numerous moments after a diagnosis or an understanding about perhaps what your loved one is going to be facing or is facing from a disease and condition state perspective, and really not knowing where to turn. And so this is a bit of a quite a one-stop shop, but an area where someone can start. So whether it's giving a call to this 855 number or going to our website, caregiveraction.org, where you can do a web chat, or just sending an email through that same portal and being able to get a response back is really meant to provide caregivers with a lifeline of information, whether that might mean they themselves are having a difficult day and going through mental health crisis and they just don't know where to turn or who to talk to. If they just got a bill in the mail from the insurer for Medicare, or and not understanding what the copay is for a prescription drug that was purchased, or just not being sure of how to get more help in the home, or even look for a place that may be a respite opportunity to have a loved one go and stay for a few days or a week in order to give that person a break. But all of it is about listening. And so our team of social workers provide support, they provide insight, and most importantly, being able to be that ear so that caregivers know that they are not alone. So I'm gonna actually stop screen sharing and kind of start to get into more of a conversation with you guys. But before I turn it over to Jody to talk a bit more about not only our organization but her work as a family caregiver. What I'll share with you is that I've been in aging services, as I mentioned before, about 20 years. And, one of the things that I've seen that hasn't changed is really the difficulty of caregiving, that it is a very taxing, stressful, and a profession, as well as a calling when it comes to being a family caregiver, that is difficult for really any individual. You don't routinely find that someone just jumps up and says, "This is the easiest thing I've ever done is being a caregiver." It's quite the opposite for many individuals. And so understanding that as we talk about what the caregiving workforce really wants, part of that is understanding that individuals that are, whether they're paid or unpaid caregivers, will routinely tell you that they want to be there for their loved one. They want to be there for the person that they're supporting, or they want to be there for that individual, and so being able to understand that it's not pulling teeth for them to be a part of that caring community and care circle for that individual, but instead the difficulty is that how can they be well equipped to do their caregiving role as best as they can, and to be able to thrive in their own humanity, once their caregiving responsibilities for that day, that week, that year, have come to a close. And so when we talk about the aging services community, I think it's really important to point out that the caregiving workforce and what they really want, from perspective I've seen, year in and year out, is really to be heard and to be understood, and recognizing that the resources and supports that are out there to support them, knowing what they are, where they can resource, where they can access those, and thus our mission at Caregiver Action Network being so important, but also noting that they're there for the long haul many times because they want to be a part of this ecosystem. But even more importantly is recognizing that with everything that, is changing in our world when it comes to technology and artificial intelligence and robotics and just you name it, the one thing that we can be certain of right now, at least, is that the robots aren't coming to take the role of a caregiver. There's not a program, there's not a treaty, there's not a bill that is going to negate the role of a caregiver. We are, at the end of the day, humans caring for humans, and that humanity is really what is the binding tie for caregivers. And so recognizing that, because of that longevity of need that will be there, because of the increasing demand that may be there for caregivers, and their care recipients, being able to be in a role, whether it's our organization, where it's the one you serve, or it's your family at home, asking, how can I help? And then sometimes you may get an answer that's like, I have no idea. But being able to perhaps settle into that and recognize that, maybe they don't, but perhaps there's just a need for you to just be with them, and understanding that that role, is one that, is not, relegated to just 9 to 5, and or just a few hours a day, but it really is all encompassing. And so recognizing that when you reach out to and support a caregiver, or when you as a caregiver reach out for support, it really is imperative that we make sure that we put their needs, in the forefront, because many times in their role, they are putting their needs in the background. So I'll pause there and ask our good friend Jody, to chime in. And Jody, I hope I've not stepped on your toes too much and like said content that you were going to say,
No,
which
not at all.
I'm really usually guilty of doing. So, but Jody, take it away.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I am fortunate that at Caregiver Action Network, I get to work on putting together the resources, focusing on different disease states and conditions or different caregiving scenarios, and then promote them to our community of family caregivers and AAAs and patient advocacy groups. And it's something that, he said, I'm always learning, which to me, that's a very, very good thing. One of the things that I really enjoy about working at CAN is that I get to hear from caregivers themselves. We've held roundtables for caregivers of loved ones with various diseases, and to me, it's fascinating to hear their caregiving stories, the challenges that they've encountered, how they've overcome them, and the advice that they have for other caregivers. I also do what we call Fun Friday posts on Facebook. And these posts are generally more lighthearted than what we usually post. Things like, if you had a week off without any caregiving responsibilities, how would you spend that week? Just, something kind of, lighthearted, get people to think about something other than, oh, we have a doctor's appointment at this time, and just all the stuff that they need to do. And it's interesting to see, sometimes the questions are a little more serious, such as, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever gotten about caregiving? And it's interesting which types of questions get more comments. And in case you're wondering, it's generally the ones asking, what's the best piece of advice you've gotten? Which kind of defeats the purpose of the Fun Friday post, but never mind. And I see my interaction with caregivers as kind of a temperature check. I want to make sure that the information and resources that we're putting out there are actually helping people. To me, if what we're doing isn't educating caregivers and making their lives a bit easier in some way, then we're doing something wrong. And if there's a great need for something that we're missing, then let's have a conversation about it to make sure that we're giving people what it is that they need that will help them. So my experience as a family caregiver is I was a long distance caregiver for my dad, who had a glioblastoma, and my mom was still alive then, so I wasn't super involved with his care, but I did, attend some of his doctor's appointments and was kept informed on his treatment, was involved with some of the decision making. And he died in 2000, 8 months after his diagnosis. Several years after that, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I became a long distance caregiver for her. My family's in Milwaukee, and it was just me and my sister this time. So I was much more kind of hands-on, much more involved. My sister lived near my mom, so she was, she was the primary caregiver, but I flew back to Milwaukee many times, and my sister and I made all the big decisions together. And my mom passed away in 2013 at only 69. And then a few years ago, a very close friend of mine was diagnosed with lung cancer. And her family was completely across the country. So I was there to help her after her surgery and go to her oncology appointments, and was her sounding board when she just needed to just talk things through about different treatments, and just you needed to talk to somebody. And then when it became evident that treatment was no longer an option, I was there just to help her with whatever she needed. So kind of different types. Before coming to work for CAN, I had never heard of the organization. So when I started looking into them, looking at the website, reading kind of what resources they had, so much of the information would have been really helpful to me when I was doing the bulk of my caregiving. There's so many things I'm like, oh, if I'd only known about this. When I was caring for my mom with Alzheimer's, I didn't know that aggression was something that could come along with the disease until I came here and looked at our Fighting the Wave resources. To me, that explained why my usually sweet mom was cursing up a storm, was calling my sister names, which I won't repeat here because it was not nice. I was caring from a distance, so it's very possible she also had a nickname for me. I just didn't have to hear it day after day after day after day, like my sister did. And I liked that working hard. Sometimes I get to work in something from my personal life. For example, I just wrote an article on participating in clinical trials for multiple sclerosis. And I've spoken on my caregiver experience at a conference on agitation with Alzheimer's. And I'm speaking this weekend on one focusing on major depressive disorder. So I like that I'm actually personally able to possibly help people. And I hope in general just that my experience can help caregivers in some way and make their lives even just a tiny bit better for a few minutes. So, thanks.
Well, Jody and Marvell, thank you so much for sharing your stories and really laying the groundwork for this conversation. Because I think everything you said really sets us up to get into some questions and talk about the ways, and we have some questions in the chat that Marvell, thank you for jumping in and answering. I appreciate the moderation assist. It's always nice to have multiple hands doing the moderator's work. But first off, the first question that I want to answer that we had, and I just want to address, is Marvell talked about serving as the board treasurer for CFI. CFI is the entity that owns the Greenhouse Project and Pioneer Network. So there were two separate sort of culture change organizations in elder care that came together under the CFI banner in 2022. So we work together. We're all one big happy family, really working to improve both the design and culture of elder care communities. And that includes long-term care services and supports in the community as well. We also had some questions about paid caregiving. I really like this question because it talks about the way that paid caregiving and family caregiving are often intertwined, right? If you're a family caregiver, you may not be being that caregiver role all the time. There may be a paid care aide, or you may be a family caregiver for someone who's living in a care community. My family is going through that right now. My wife's grandmother is living. She's soon to be discharged back into the community, but for the last several months, she's been living in a post-acute care facility after a stroke. And so my wife's family and by extension, me, even though I work in this industry, been kind of getting a crash course in how to be a family caregiver when there are professional caregivers also on the scene when someone might be living in a community or a facility. And so all of these things are intertwined. The quality of, if you have happy professional caregivers, whether it's in the home or in a communal setting, you get a lot of support for the family caregivers. And it makes the family caregiver job easier. And if you have strong family caregivers, it makes the paid caregiving job a lot easier too. If everyone is on the same page, if everyone feels supported. And so the first question that I have, I think is, and you can both draw on your professional and personal experience, but so often, when you go to a conference or you sit in on one of these webinars, you'll hear, what are some of the factors and people that make a caregiver want to feel that make a caregiver either feel supported, or if it's a professional caregiver, stay in that job? And everyone always says, oh, it can depend, or oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But in your experience, what are the key factors that caregivers really feel? What are the really top factors that impact a caregiver's feeling supported, feeling valued, and really feeling comfortable and empowered in their jobs, whether it's professional or their job as a family caregiver? And I'll open it up to the both of you.
Yeah, I'll start. I would say that pay is always something that comes up first, I think, in most people's minds, particularly if you are a paid caregiver, because I think it is widely recognized that that role and that profession is underpaid and undervalued in so many different measurements. But at the end of the day, um, that pay is can be secondary to the work environment in which that individual serves. And so that goes to, what is their relationship with their manager or supervisor or the leadership of the organization? Is it one that is respectful? Is it one that they are seen and valued for the role and the energy that they bring to the organization? Are they listened to and sought after for their opinion and insights when it comes to the organization itself? Are they sought after and listened to when it comes to the insights on the care of the individuals that are under their care? Or are they really an after the fact thought for being a part of the organization, an integrated part of it? What I would also say is that recognizing that an individual as a paid caregiver, many times in my experience, will recognize that they know that they're not going to be the highest paid person necessarily within the organization, which is another conversation we can have, because they certainly on any given day, if a caregiver doesn't show up for work one day, that organization and the care is impacted greatly. If the administrator, no offense to administrators, but I was one previous nursery administrator, if they don't show up, I got to tell you, people still get their meal. They still get a chance to have activity in their life and their medication, and really the life goes on there. And so I think a lot of the factors have to do around recognition of the value that they bring to the organization. And I, for one, believe that that goes down to things as simple as, is there a comfortable place in the organization for them to actually take a break? And I know it seems like a small thing. It's like, well, we can make a break room look nice. Well, yeah, but recognize the fact that as a paid caregiver and with the workforce crisis we're talking about, if someone is picking up a double, you know, probably nursing administration is jumping them down and happy you picked up a double. So that means you are offering 16 out of 24 hours of your life to that organization. And if you don't have a quiet or comfortable space to take a break, in my opinion, that says to that caregiver that the organization is not putting them in the valued role that they should be, because they are not being given the support they need in order to thrive and really be a part of the organization, but also look after their own needs. So it's multifaceted, Alex, I would say. I know we're going to talk about pay a little bit more, but being valued, and as well as Brenda says, being valued and supported is extremely important. And recognizing that if you don't know how to do that, that's okay. But if you are unwilling to ask and find out, then that's a problem.
Yeah, and Jody, from the family caregiver side, what are some of the factors? You talked about stuff you wish you had known. What are some of the things that maybe when you provide supports to family caregivers, that really made the most difference to you when you were in that situation? What were you looking for? Was it a space to talk? Was it resources? What was it?
I would say, well, just having access to the resources that you need so you can find out as much as you can about, your loved one's condition. And just, it helps you, to me, if you're more educated on something, you're can make better decisions, I guess. But I think a big thing is just having a support network, whether it's a support group, whether it's online, whether it's a group of friends that you get together with once a week at Starbucks, just to talk things through. I think it's so helpful to have people around you who've been through something similar that can say, oh, I remember when I went through this, this is what I did. They can share their experiences, kind of give you advice, and they can just be, kind of a sounding board, just that you can just like, oh, I had a horrible day with mom yesterday, and you can just vent, and they get it. They understand where you're coming from, and can give you, oh, well, next time you might want to try this, or just, kind of really, really back you up. I think just makes you feel supported.
Yeah, and I think that is also something that can be missing for a lot of paid caregivers too, especially if the pay is low, maybe the job security doesn't feel that great. Being able to either speak up, have those kinds of productive conversations with management, and maybe not venting, but maybe saying, hey, I have some ideas about how things could run differently here. Having that open, communication network where people who are working on the caregiving level, which Marvell, I love that point you made. Again, no offense to administrators or executives, but the caregiving I always say is the hardest. I have not worked a day in my life as hard as people who do direct caregiving. I freely admit I've never done that before. I've always had office jobs, and I know I have not worked as hard at any day in my life as any given day the caregivers work in care settings, whether it's professionally or for a loved one. Freely admit that. And they have so much wisdom. You learn so much on the job, especially if you've been on the job for a long time. You have so much that you can learn. And I think there does need to be more reciprocal lanes of communication, not top down. Key part of the greenhouse model where I work and where I live in my mindset is the idea that the people actually delivering the care directly at the bedside, at the table, should have a significant say in how things are run, how things are operated. That empowerment, I don't want to minimize money, because I think, that's the one thing that frustrates me so much, having gone to a lot of conferences and heard, CEOs and other executives dismiss the idea of money. I mean, we all need to put food on the table. We all need to pay our rent, pay our mortgage, pay our car loan, pay all that stuff. And I think it's very, disrespectful to assume that people should be able to do all this work without getting fairly compensated, because I think that's a key source of turnover. That's a key source of absenteeism, all of this stuff. But that reciprocal conversation, realizing that, maybe if as an administrator doesn't know everything, if I suddenly woke up and I was running a nursing home, I suddenly found myself in that situation, the first thing I think I would do is gather all the direct care staff and talk about it. And also providing space for, how many of us in our jobs, go out after work with colleagues sometimes to blow off some steam or talk about new ideas that we have, whether it's over a beer or some coffee. Accepting that, having a little bit of those spaces, I think would go a long way to help people feel better about their jobs. Moving on to the next question, I want to talk about the we hear that a lot. But I think there is a big question of what is a living wage. I think it's easy for folks to say, oh, we pay a living wage, where they're paying close to minimum. So I would love to know your thoughts about what a minimum age is. What a living wage is. And for me, I'll just give my definition, and it's something that we saw during COVID in nursing homes. Uh, you know, such a key driver of the spread of COVID in nursing homes was the fact that CNAs have to work multiple jobs, and that was through no fault of their own. They were not doing anything wrong. They were not paid enough to support their families, to put food on the table and a roof over their heads and their children's heads. And we saw that, so to me, a living wage means getting paid enough to have one job, to live in the area where you're providing the care, and to maybe have a kid or two. I don't think that's too much to ask, but I think unfortunately in a lot of situations it is. But I would like to open it up to the both of you to discuss. What do you think of when you hear living wage? Oh, you're muted, Marvell.
Thank you. My neighbor loves to mow the lawn whenever I'm on Zoom, so apologize for anything in the background. My feelings on the term living wage has evolved, and it evolved really recently in the last couple of years or so, because I believe that that if you go by do a Google search and say, okay, a living wage calculator for your local area, that yeah, you can find out like what a person would need to make, if they were a two-person household, two, earning household with two kids or whatever else, and what the local rent is. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. But I think in practice that we look at a living wage many times as a survival wage, meaning that like, oh yeah, you can pay your bills and eat. And it's like, well, yeah, that's great, but that is not a life. If you said to anyone that like, hey, for your profession for the rest of your life, you'll be able to eat and you'll have a roof over your head, and that's it. That's the goal. I think that many individuals would not consider their careers to be that fruitful. And so when I think of a living wage, a competitive wage, or just a value adding wage, I think of the fact that systemically our model, whether it's in nursing homes, assisted living, CCRCs, you name it, really have been built around paid caregivers being the lowest or close to the lowest paid individuals in the organization. And that really is something that has to change really demonstratively. Some of that changed in the last few years because of the workforce crisis really coming to everyone's front door. And so you're seeing wages going from, 11, 12, $13 an hour to 17, 19, 20, $21 an hour, but also seeing that those wages were still increasing in professions that would definitely not be considered human to human caregiving role. So if you're working in retail, nothing against retail, but that is a different, type of energy. That is a different type of skill set that is required for that. And so, when I think of living wage, I really think about is this individual or individuals spending more than a third of their wages on their rent or their mortgage, because statistics would show if you are in a very precarious position and you're more at risk for being becoming unhoused. Is this individual utilizing certain types of assistant programs, state or federal assistant programs, to supplement their income because they qualify for them? And it doesn't mean that's a bad thing in the sense of getting those resources, but it does recognize that when you have a wage that also is at of a level of income qualifies you to be at a level of poverty by just a federal standard, then that's not a good thing. Even though that person may be getting their income supplemented so that they have food and perhaps supplemented rent or subsidies, but that's good that they're able to live and have that support. But it just speaks to that there's systemic issues within our model that have a bigger thing to be addressed of how can we build a model that really does bring a wage that is a value add wage for the organization and not one that is survival.
Yeah, and to me that shows, what we value, as a society or as a culture. And if we're saying that working as a caregiver is a subsistence job, what does that say about how we value the work? What does that say about how we value elders? What does that say about how we value, caregiving as a concept? And that is great perspective. And I think you got some agreement here in the Q&A from one of our attendees, Donna Woodward. She said that as a former CNA, she considers a living wage to mean the ability to afford rent, food, medical care, transportation, internet access, some news subscriptions, a vacation each year, entertainment every month. It means more than just paying basic bills. And I fully agree with that concept. But too often, we don't, when people say, oh, how do we make this a career? I think that's one thing you hear a lot of. How do we make caregiving a career? How do we make it more professionalized? How do we give people pathways to career ladders, you might hear? I think that's one of it, right? Realizing that you can have not just a subsistence life, but you can have a solid life with all of the things that you enjoy. And I think that's a really vital way of looking at it from a wage standpoint. I want to switch gears a little bit to address a question that we have about adult day centers, because you mentioned respite care as something that is important for family caregivers, and there's definitely a paid caregiver angle as well, because paid caregivers usually provide that respite care. Do you, Caregiver Action Network, are you doing work around adult day services? Do you see growth in that sector? Let's just talk about that for a little bit, because I personally think it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, so we have resources on our website or through our help desk where individuals that may be looking for adult day programs in their area that we can refer them to find those resources. But when it comes to respite care, we believe that it is a good option. It's not an option that's attainable for everyone. In some instances, if the person is a dual eligible or Medicaid qualified, that is a payment source for it. For others, being able to pay privately for a few days of respite, potentially is something that they can do. And so adult day centers, adult day programs do have a place in the continuum of care, particularly when it comes to respite, but it's one piece of the pie.
Absolutely. And, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jody.
Jody, were you going to add something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, we're also part of something called Community Care Corps, which is a federally supported grant that goes to different, generally nonprofit and other organizations around the country, that these programs are specifically to help older Americans stay at home and keep their independence a little bit longer through volunteer services. And one of the services that some of these programs provide is respite care for the caregiver. So somebody will come in, every Wednesday for 3 hours in the afternoon and, sit with your grandma while you can go and do whatever it is that you need to do.
Yeah, I think another aspect of adult day centers or PACE centers a lot of times is how they can be funded. PACE is the Medicaid funded benefit for folks who otherwise would qualify for a nursing home level of care, but it kind of shifts those dollars away from the nursing home and toward home and community-based services. Another important angle of that is it's not just respite for the family caregiver, but it's also engagement for the person who's receiving those care services. Right. I think we all learned during COVID the really negative effects of social isolation. And I think it's important to look at, I think sometimes I know I might feel a little bit guilty if I was looking at it as respite care, like, oh, I need a break from caring for my loved one. I'm sure there's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of mixed feelings about that. But if you reframe that and think about it as it's not just respite, think about today, even if there aren't any caregiving issues, do you want to spend every minute of every day with your mother, your father, your daughter, your son? Maybe not every minute of every day. You deserve to go out and see friends and explore hobbies and do other activities. So I think that's another important part of it too, is that pay centers and adult day centers provide the opportunity for outings, interactions, meeting new friends, meeting old friends, all of that good stuff. So
We've heard from some of the recipients of these volunteer services saying, I just loved when I would get my phone call from my volunteer, just asking how I was doing. It was nice to know that somebody cared, that somebody was checking in on me, that I wasn't just off on my own.
Yeah, and even just hearing the voice of someone who is not your son or your daughter, having that ability, when you're older and receiving caregiving support, even if you do have dementia, even if you do have other challenges, you're still a person. You still like to have conversations with different people and meet new folks and talk to somebody who is outside of that family dynamic, which I think can make family caregiving even more complicated. So we're toward the end of our time, and I just wanted to close this out with some final thoughts from you both. If there's one thing you wish that the wider world understood about caregiving, whether it's paid, unpaid, whether, we have a wide audience of people here. We have elder care leaders, we have, people who are caregivers themselves, administrators, all sorts of folks. What's the one thing that you wish people knew about the caregiving role that maybe they don't know as much? And Jody, I'll start with you, not to put you on the spot.
I would say I this is a generalization, but I think there's people out there that don't get how hard it is, that don't understand, the emotional, roller coaster that you're on, the constant, kind of worry in the back of your mind, the trying to do 6 things when you only have time for 3, just like the constant go, 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 go. I think a lot of people don't quite understand that. And for the caregivers, I want them to know that it's okay not to be perfect. Not every day is going to go perfectly. Things are going to go wrong. Take it one day at a time, or 1 hour at a time, or, whatever you need to do to get through it.
That's great advice. Marvell?
No, I don't think I could put it any better, quite frankly. It's not only extremely tough, but recognizing that mistakes are gonna happen quite routinely, because many times an individual isn't necessarily um, coming to the table because they've planned for many months to become a caregiver. And so mistakes are going to happen because for many individuals the caregiving role, whether it's paid or unpaid, it's a learning curve. Even after many years of being a paid caregiver, it is still a learning curve. Regulations change, rules change, who you're caring for changes, processes change. And so being able to understand that giving yourself grace to know that this is difficult work, and that you are each day doing the best you can, and that's good. That is good enough.
Well, I appreciate that, Marvell. I appreciate both of our speakers. I just wanted to give some quick pitches. You see on your screen here, there's a slide for the Direct Care Workforce Strategy Center. If you're interested in more of the higher level direct care workforce planning, data, research, resources, this is part of a grant-funded project that we at CFI are a part of. It's with the Administration for Community Living and the National Council on Aging. They've developed this Direct Care Workforce Strategy Center. The URL right there is at the bottom of your screen. Take a look. They're doing some really interesting work. They have other webinars that you can watch. They have resources for caregivers. They have resources for states that are interested in bolstering their caregiving workforce. So please check it out. It's a very interesting and exciting project. Our next webinar is coming up on June 20th. Bit of a different topic, but it's with our friends at CENI, geriatrician Dr. Rosemary Laird. We'll be talking about quality of life in skilled nursing facilities and its bowel and bladder wellness. So those are topics that are important. They relate to good sleep, good quality of life. And so if you're interested in that, please visit our website and you can take a look. And if you're interested in all of these topics, just a quick plug for our conference, our annual conference. It's going to be held in Grand Rapids, Michigan, November 11th to the 13th. We will be opening registration within the next month, so stay tuned for information on that. And with that, I want to thank our guests for today's presentation. Jody, Marvell, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for participating. And remember, you will get a recording and the slides at the email address that you used to sign up. So please share far and wide. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Take care,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Jody.